Imagine being in the middle of a frenzied crowd, the screams echoing off the stone walls, the smell of blood mixed with dust in the air. The Colosseum of Rome wasn't just a place of entertainment, it was an arena of power, status, and survival. But what if I told you that watching these games wasn't as simple as it seemed? That there were secret rules and dark details nobody ever told you about? In today's video, you're going to find out what it was really like to be there, feeling every emotion, living every moment. The first shock, getting into the Colosseum, wasn't for everyone. Do you think you could just walk in and take a seat? Not a chance. To secure your place, you needed a tesserae, an exclusive ticket, and it wasn't handed out to just anyone. Every social class had its designated spot, and if you weren't in the right place, well, you wouldn't want to find out what happened. The emperor wanted everything to be flawless, so the Romans developed a strict organization system. The games were so important that, when they were announced, the city turned into a controlled chaos. The streets were packed, merchants sold everything, from Lucky Charms to exotic snacks. But the real question is, what really happened behind the scenes of these spectacles? Rome knew how to control crowds, and the Colosseum was proof of that. The 80 numbered entry gates were designed to get everyone to their seats without confusion. But the truth is, the best seats were already reserved for the most powerful. If you were a senator, you'd have a prime spot, right near the action. But if you were just a commoner, get ready to be far, far away, straining to catch a glimpse of the fight between the heads of the crowd. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow the channel. Let's hit our goal of 1,000 subscribers, let's do this together. And here's a fun fact that few people know, some of these seats hid secrets and advantages that only the cleverest spectators were aware of. The games could last for days, even weeks. Emperor Titus himself, during the grand opening, held an incredible 100 days of carnage, but few talk about the dangers lurking inside the Colosseum. Beyond the brutality of the fights, there was something far worse. The emotions were so intense that many spectators fainted, and some people simply disappeared into the crowd, never to be seen again. But what really happened to them? Some say they were victims of accidents, while others prefer not to talk about it. And if I told you that the Colosseum wasn't just a place of entertainment, but also of conspiracy and death? Now imagine, you finally enter the Colosseum, walk through the massive gates, and feel a chill down your spine as you take in the grandiosity of the structure. But as you look around, you notice something intriguing, not just anyone could sit close to the arena. There was a meticulous division, almost like a silent power game happening right before your eyes. The best seats, known as the podium, were reserved for Rome's elite. Senators, emperors, and high-ranking officials sat there, right next to the action, in luxuriously decorated seats made of marble with extravagant details. Titus Livius, one of the greatest chroniclers of the time, described how these powerful figures watched the fights with a breathtaking view, while the rest of the people could barely see the gladiators fighting for their lives. Just above the podium was the first upper row, called Medianum Primum, reserved for the equestrian class, wealthy and influential men, but not as prestigious as the senators. They had a decent view, but they knew they weren't at the top of the food chain. The social hierarchy was clear at every level of the Colosseum. You could feel the weight of your status just by looking at where you were sitting. Now, if you were a plebeian with some level of prestige, you'd still get a decent seat in the lower Medianum, but, if your social status wasn't great, get ready to climb. And climb a lot. The poorer you were, the higher up you sat, until you reached the infamous upper seats. And what about the women? Well, most of them, except for the respected Vestal virgins, were practically shoved to the highest levels, far away from the action. Foreigners, manual laborers, and the lower classes of Roman society also ended up there, almost as if Rome wanted to constantly remind them of their place in the social hierarchy. But here's something even more impressive: the slaves. They didn't even have the privilege of watching the games, unless they were working at the event. The few freedmen who managed to get inside had to settle for the distant wooden benches, offering a barely significant view compared to the powerful figures seated in the front rows. If this makes sense to you, comment the number 1. If you have a different perspective on these teachings, comment the number 0 and share your opinion here. But here's the real secret: no matter where you were seated, the Colosseum was designed so that everyone had a clear view of the arena. With an impressive length of 180 meters and a width of 156 meters, the elliptical structure was carefully planned to ensure that no one missed a moment of glory, or terror. The steep angle of the stands was meticulously calculated to allow even those in the highest levels to see the action without obstruction. It appeared to be a democratic spectacle, but in reality, it was brutally unequal. So now I ask you, have you ever imagined what it would be like to be in the Colosseum and realize that your social status determined your experience? Believe me, the Romans knew how to play this game like no one else. Have you ever stopped to think about how the Roman Colosseum managed to impress the crowds, not just with its bloody battles, but with the grandeur of the spectacles? It wasn't just about fighting, it was about creating an unforgettable visual and emotional experience. You might be wondering, how did tens of thousands of people move through that giant stone structure without chaos? The answer lies in the genius architecture of the Colosseum. The corridors and staircases were wide, well ventilated, and designed to allow a continuous flow of spectators. The poet Martial, who lived during that time, described how the massive crowd moved with almost military precision. It seemed like every Roman knew exactly where to go, because the Colosseum was built for it. And don't think the sound of the battles got lost in the vastness of the place. The Romans thought of everything. Vitruvius, the master of Roman architecture, described how the acoustics were meticulously planned so that every gladiator's scream and every beast's roar could be heard perfectly, even in the highest seats. Can you imagine the impact of that? Every strike, every cry of pain, every applause echoed as if the very stones of the Colosseum were alive. But if there was one moment that made the crowd erupt in ecstasy, it was the arrival of the emperor. Even before he was seen, bronze trumpets echoed throughout the arena, announcing the arrival of the most powerful figure in Rome. The crowd held its breath, and when the emperor finally appeared, the entire Colosseum roared like a volcano about to erupt. Suetonius, the Roman historian, wrote about how Titus, one of the most beloved emperors, was greeted as if he were a living god. His mere presence sent the audience into a frenzy because he knew how to turn an ordinary spectacle into something epic, something that would be remembered for generations. And Pliny the Younger described the moment as a sound so deafening that it felt like the very stones of the Colosseum were alive, echoing the cries of Rome. Now tell me, can you imagine being there, feeling this electrifying energy and witnessing it all up close? And if you think you've seen it all, just wait until you uncover the darkest secrets of the Colosseum. Keep watching, because the next revelations will leave you speechless. If you think gladiator battles started out of nowhere, you're seriously mistaken. Before the blood was spilled on the sand, there was an entire choreographed spectacle, full of rituals, tension, and mystery. It all started with the Pompa, a grand procession that sent chills down the spines of even the bravest. Imagine the roar of the trumpets echoing through the Colosseum as the gates opened, and one by one, gladiators, wild animals, and war prisoners paraded before the crowd. They emerged from the depths of the Colosseum, walking through dark tunnels and stepping into the center of the arena under thunderous applause. But there was one moment that made even the most seasoned spectators hold their breath: the salute to the emperor. The gladiators took their positions, raised their weapons, and in unison, echoed the legendary words. "Hail, Emperor, those who are about to die salute you." It was the grim reminder of what was about to happen. And from that moment on, there was no turning back. Every gladiator had their own pre-fight rituals. Some touched the ground in a superstitious gesture, others clashed their weapons together, trying to intimidate their opponent. The audience watched everything in tense silence. The historian Tacitus reported that every gesture was analyzed as an omen of the fight's outcome. When the signal was given, the arena transformed. The gladiators moved slowly, studying every move of their opponent, waiting for the perfect opening to strike. It wasn't just about strength, it was about strategy. Different types of warriors faced unique challenges. The retiarius, agile and equipped with a net and trident, faced the powerful secutor, protected by heavy armor and a massive shield. It was a true duel between speed and brutality. Pliny the Elder described these fights as a deadly dance, where not only strength but cunning decided the fate of men. But what happened when a gladiator fell or was disarmed? Silence took over the Colosseum. All eyes turned to the emperor. The defeated gladiator's life hung by a thread. If the crowd raised their thumbs up, mercy was granted. If they pointed down, well, you can imagine the bloody outcome. Tacitus described this moment as an instant where fate was decided by a single gesture, while the crowd watched in piercing silence, as if their own lives were at stake. And you thought intermissions were for resting? Not at all. The Colosseum's breaks were just as brutal as the fights. One of the most anticipated attractions was the venations, the famous wild animal hunts. Lions, tigers, elephants, and even crocodiles were released into the arena to face hunters armed with nothing but spears and nets. It was a battle between man and beast, where survival was a matter of seconds. But the Roman audience wanted more, and they got it. During intermissions, the Colosseum hosted bizarre fights, such as dwarf battles and even female warriors. Imagine the crowd's shock seeing women fighting against dwarfs or even exotic animals. Tacitus wrote about this practice, stating that while some were fascinated by the novelty, others saw it as an outrage to Roman traditions. But nothing surpassed the most macabre spectacle of all: public executions. Prisoners of war, criminals, and condemned slaves were forced to face wild animals or reenact bloody myths from Roman and Greek mythology, in performances that seemed too real to be mere entertainment. It was cruel, brutal, and no one could look away. Suetonius wrote about how the emperor made sure to turn these executions into unforgettable events, often creating deadly traps that left the crowd in awe. Believe it, the Colosseum was much more than just a stage for battles. It was a deadly entertainment machine. And there are still many dark secrets hidden within its ruins. Stay tuned, because in the next video, you'll discover the shocking truths that Rome tried to hide for centuries. If you think the Colosseum was only about gladiator fights, you're very mistaken. The real story is much darker and filled with secrets that Rome tried to keep buried. When the fights paused, the arena transformed into a true stage of horror. Titus, one of the most infamous emperors, spared no effort in entertaining the bloodthirsty crowd. Criminals were dragged from their cells, stripped, and forced to play characters from Roman mythology, but with a terrifying twist: their stories always ended in death. Imagine being thrown into the arena, dressed as Icarus, only to face a brutal death in front of thousands of eyes hungry for violence. And if you think that was enough, wait until you hear about the naval battles. With astonishing engineering, the Colosseum's arena was flooded to recreate epic maritime battles. Real ships sailed through an artificial sea, while gladiators fought for their lives amid the waters. Each new spectacle was more grandiose and terrifying than the last. And the crowd, of course, never got tired of it. When the final blow was struck and the audience finally fell silent, the arena became a field of devastation. Bodies lay scattered, blood soaked into the sand, and the weight of the spectacle still hung in the air. It was then that the true unsung heroes of the Colosseum stepped in, the Arenarii, a team of slaves and workers dedicated to the grueling task of cleaning the arena. Buckets of water, shovels, and brooms were their weapons as they removed the bodies and covered every trace of the massacre with a fresh layer of sand. But there was one thing everyone waited for: the surviving gladiators. They were called before the emperor to receive recognition for their courage. The crowd erupted in applause, and the ruler could decide whether a simple nod was enough or if grand words of praise were to be spoken. It was a moment of glory for a few and a lesson in humility for all. And the rewards? It wasn't just about fame. Depending on the event, the winners could earn anything from symbolic laurel crowns to unimaginable riches, land, and the long-awaited freedom. Suetonius described how Titus, in his generosity, granted gold and land to gladiators who survived the greatest challenges, ensuring their names echoed throughout Rome. Imagine leaving an event that had just changed your perception of everything. Now, multiply that by 80,000 people leaving the Colosseum at the same time. But the Romans were masters of organization. With 80 numbered exits, the Colosseum could be emptied within minutes, without chaos or panic. A true feat of engineering. And outside, a new spectacle would begin. Merchants knew exactly how to profit from the exhausted and hungry crowd. Vendors selling fresh bread, cheese, wine, and fruit positioned themselves strategically to ensure no one left without spending a few coins. But it wasn't just the stomachs that were hungry, the minds were too. While some headed home, others flooded the taverns and public baths to discuss every detail of the fights. Who was the best gladiator? Did the emperor make the right call by sparing that fighter? These conversations lasted late into the night, often ending in bets for the next games. After uncovering everything that happened inside the Colosseum, can you imagine what it felt like to be there, surrounded by that brutal and unpredictable energy? If you enjoyed this video and want to keep unraveling the mysteries of Rome, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more amazing content like this.